My name is Josh Stallman. I've been an archivist at the Pennsylvania State Archives since about 2008. I am the head of the Records Services section, and since about 2018, I have been the de facto HARC grant manager. So today I'll be talking to you about the HARC grant, some guidance, suggestions, and otherwise. So let me see if I can advance my slides here. As far as the agenda is concerned for this morning, I've scheduled this to begin at 10 o'clock. We are scheduled well past 10 o'clock. I don't anticipate this will take much more than an hour, but if anybody would like to stick around at the end and we can address questions and things like that, I'm available. But as far as our program this morning, we'll talk about the eligibility requirements and the selection process and the evaluation criteria. And as I said, we'll talk about some suggestions and tips for pulling together a competitive proposal and maybe talk about some of the common pitfalls that we've seen in applications over the last several years. And of course, the expectations of you as a grantee, should you be selected for funding. I want to note right off the bat that the grant application itself is administered through the Department of Community and Economic Development's system. So if you do have issues with the system or questions about navigating or utilizing, or you have issues with that, please note this is the customer support contact information for DCED's single application system. They have been very good the last couple grant cycles. We've had no complaints with their customer service aspects on that end. And there's also a direct link to this contact information in that application portal should you have problems as you begin working on your application. Again, I noted we'll break periodically for questions. Again, please enter your questions into chat as we go. And as you begin thinking about those specific projects and specific questions, again, please don't hesitate to reach out to me outside of today's presentation. I've got my fingers crossed that there are no deliveries, UPS or FedEx in the neighborhood today, and that my dog behaves himself. If that becomes an issue, please bear with me and we'll get through that. But just so you're aware. Just a little bit of background about the structure, if you will, of how these are working. So Pennsylvania Historical and Museum Commission is sort of the top of the umbrella, if you will. It's the official agency in the Commonwealth dealing with history and cultural resources. And under that umbrella falls the State Archives, which is where we come from. This is the Historical and Archival Records Care Grant. Again, being administered by us at the State Archives. The State Historic Preservation Office, just so you're aware, has a number of other grant opportunities under PHMC. So specifically as pertains to buildings and preservation and operational support, things of that nature, you can look to the State Historic Preservation Office for a number of other grant opportunities. So the HARC grant is what we're going to talk about today. Again, Historical and Archival Records Care Grant. We used to have a grant program. At the PHMC, we had an archival grant program up until about 2009. And of course, at that time, there was an economic issue that saw the demise of that grant program. In 2017, our State Historical Records Advisory Board petitioned the Commission to reinstate archival grant funding. And we were fortunate at that time that the Commission approved, at that time I think it was $100,000 for that, what became the first cycle in 2018, which would have been those projects that will actually be concluding this month. So that was our first class, if you will, of the HARC grants. We'll be wrapping up here at the end of the month. But again, for that cycle, we had 60 eligible applications that we were able to fund 16 of, and we were able to eke out actually $110,000, I think, of that approved 100,000. Again, funding 16 projects with that first round. The second round, the 2019 applications, we had 59 applicants and 29 of those applicants were funded. So If you can see, there's a little bit of a trend there that we were able to fund a greater percentage of applicants, and that's certainly something that we're hoping to achieve with this program. And again, working with the board, one of our objectives is to be able to work with and fund those great projects that we see people writing in to apply for, and that carried over again to the 2020 cycle for those projects that are going to hopefully be seeing funding here within the next couple months. We had 61 applicants, and 31 of those applicants were recommended for funding by the commission. So that's a pretty good take rate, but we're again hoping that we can increase that even further, and I'll talk a little bit about the particulars of that as we go along here this morning. As far as eligibility is concerned, you can see this text that's on your screen is taken directly. I mean, much of the text that you'll see this morning is taken directly from the grant announcement webpage. The full guidelines are available on the website, but again, this is just to give you a sense of who's eligible, and hopefully, hopefully you're eligible. If you don't see maybe your specific type of organization or otherwise listed here, again, please don't hesitate to reach out to me, and we can talk about and see if maybe your group would be eligible for the HARC grant. But the bottom line is what we're really looking for are nonprofit organizations with historical and archival collections. And this can include all the things that we see here: historical societies, libraries, museums, and other nonprofit community organizations that are responsible for historical records. Of course, this also includes county and municipal governments. It might not be the case that we're always thinking about the historical records that might be held by local governments, but in many cases they do hold very important historical materials. And there's sort of this catch-all down at the bottom: other historical organizations with collections consistently available for research, and organizations with the mission to help care for collections not necessarily their own. So again, we're hoping that these are maybe catch-alls to help include other organizations that might not otherwise fit those eligibility criteria. And again, if you do have specific questions about those, don't hesitate to reach out to me. Continuing with the eligibility requirements, of course, one of the requirements is that you must be located in Pennsylvania, 501c3 or an entity of local government. And in other words, when just being able to prove nonprofit status. There's the caveat there that you must be incorporated or existing for 2 years prior to application. That's largely, I guess, just to ensure that you're not a fly-by-night operation that's going to get grant funding and suddenly disappear off the map. Organizations are encouraged to, but not required to, be registered with the PA charitable organizations, and you can see the information there. That's not going to be a ding against you if you're not, but again, just noting that that's encouraged. There are a number of associations for local government. So there's things like the State Association of Boroughs or the State Association of Townships, so forth and so on. Those associations would be eligible to apply for a HARC grant as well. And of course, when we talk about subunits, that might be, we have the example on the screen here of the Recorder of Deeds office, or it might be the Special Collections grouping under a university library or otherwise. So those individual subunits are actually able to apply for the grants themselves as well, so long as they individually fulfill the eligibility requirements that we've discussed here. So who can't apply? Basically, PHMC entities are not able to apply outside of associate groups. There's no federal organizations or federal groups that can be funded, no state government entities that can be funded, and of course, no individuals are eligible for funding either. These grants are meant for organizations, institutions, again, even community groups and things of that nature, but just not individuals. So this is our first built-in break for questions. If anybody has any questions, again, please feel free to type those into chat at this time, and I'll be glad to address those at this time. If not, we'll just give it a minute before we move along. Okay, I don't see any questions coming in. If any do arise, I'll make sure we address those before the next sort of punctuated break there. So categories of support, and when I mention this, if you're looking at the grant announcement online, it might look like there's two different programs with Collections Care Project and then the local government projects. Those are not distinct programs. It's all the same grant. The only distinction being there might be additional considerations under the local government section. So the same types of projects are going to be eligible. But again, if you're coming at this from the local government perspective, be sure to check out the text specific to the local governments, and we'll talk about that. But again, these types of projects apply across the board, whether you're a historical records repository, historical society, library, museum, local government. The grant is primarily intended for the preservation of Pennsylvania records. Again, the types of projects that we see here isn't a comprehensive list, just some examples. And we can be talking about things like surveying, inventorying, preserving, arranging, describing. And of course, as you might imagine, digitization has been a big theme, certainly been popular over the last 3 grant cycles. Note that there are digitization guidelines that should be adhered to, and it would be beneficial as an applicant to indicate in your narrative somewhere that you have an understanding of what those guidelines are. So if you're going to be digitizing images, make sure that you convey what resolution and format you'll be digitizing those images, or if you're going to be looking at audio visual material, you know, that you're going to be adhering to archival standards for what those formats and files and ultimately the storage is going to look like on the back end. It's also helpful if you would be applying for a digitization grant to indicate maybe the fate of the original materials, what the housing might be for those materials. So again, if you have a photo collection that you're going to be digitizing, what then is going to be the fate of those original prints or negatives once they've been digitized? If you're able to show that, you know, maybe part of your project is that you will be purchasing the supplies to house those materials once they've been digitized, just painting that full picture for the review panel will be helpful. Again, some additional categories. We talked about reformatting with digitizing. One of the things that's helpful there is if that's something that you're going to be looking at doing, again, remember we're working to preserve records. So digitization is great for access, but if you can work in that preservation component, maybe noting that these are a priority for reformatting because of X, Y, and Z, whether that's they're currently in very poor condition from frequent handling, or maybe those materials are stored in or have been stored in an less than ideal environment, and otherwise making that case that those records are at risk. Again, that's going to be a benefit to you as you're thinking about applying for reformatting or digitizing. Inventorying, surveying, this is an opportunity to get a better handle on what materials you have. Again, the HARC grants, often we are reaching out to, in many cases, a small historical societies that maybe are all volunteer, and you have a group of volunteers that's ready and willing and able to begin working on the hands-on processing, but maybe you don't have a good sense of what it is that you have, and you need to bring in a consultant or a contractor to give you an idea, upfront of how to approach and how to tackle things. Maybe you need to begin inventorying those materials so you have a better handle on what they are before you can then move on to the digitization component or to the preservation aspects. So those are things that can be done as well. And you'll see the last bullet point there, even down to emergency or disaster mitigation and action projects. Again, we're looking at preserving records, so we want to make sure that things are not lost to floods or fires or otherwise in that way. As I mentioned, there is a separate heading for local government. As I noted, this is in addition to, this is not exclusive. Again, that's to say that the local governments are able to buy supplies and do reformatting. One of the distinctions here is that you'll want to make sure it's clear that you demonstrate, and this is true of anybody, but it's particularly true for the local governments, demonstrate the significance of the records, why they're important, what the historical nature of the records are. In many cases, when you're thinking about permanent or important or historical records at the local government level, you'll be thinking about those things that are on the county or municipal records manual identified as permanent records. So, in many cases, those are going to be the types of records that you would want to consider if you're working on this from that local government aspect. And there is a further distinction. Anybody who's coming at this again from the local government, you may be familiar with the PDFA policy that we have for local governments. If you're looking at a digitization project, again, there are some particular points with the PDFA that are in that digitization guideline that I pointed out earlier that would apply specifically to the local government. So really those are going to be your distinctions as we talk about the general collections care versus the local government projects. So the ineligible activities, these are the ones that you don't want to be doing. And the big ones that I'm going to point out here, the ones that we've seen several times over the last couple cycles, the big one is you can't pay existing staff. So if you have somebody on staff and you want to pay them $2,000 from HARC funds to transcribe oral histories or transcribe, 18th century German ledgers, that's not going to fly. You're going to get dinged for that. You're going to get flagged for that. You're not going to get money for that. But again, you can hire people, again, just not paying existing staff. So you can bring in student interns, you can bring in contractors, consultants, and otherwise, just not anybody who's currently on your staff payroll. And you'll see on there, there's a question, well, not a question, but there's a bullet about projects that serve a religious purpose or promote religious dogma. I don't want anybody to think that that would exclude them from applying. We have funded a number of religious affiliated groups over the last couple cycles. The distinction there is that the projects need to be working with historical materials and again, just being secular in nature and not pushing any particular agenda. One of the things you will also note on here, it says projects dealing with works of art, published books, textiles, artifacts, and museum objects. I just want to save you the hassle of applying if those are the types of materials that you're looking to have funded or get funding to have work done with. Those materials will not be funded. So again, works of art, published books, and there's a caveat to that I'll get to on the next slide, textiles, artifacts, and 3D museum objects. They are not part of the historical and archival records care grant. What we're specifically looking at are records. So we're talking about photos, documents, maybe architectural drawings, maps, audio-visual materials, oral histories, manuscripts, and things of that nature. So if you have trophies and a rock collection and things like that, those aren't the types of materials that we're looking for HARC funded projects. Continuing with the ineligible activities, I mentioned there's a caveat to one of those prior bullets, that being the published material. You can see here, and I'm going to read this to you because this is important. But this is a distinction that was made. We had a line drawn based off of our 2009 and prior grant program on what would be considered archival and not archival. And at that time, they took a hard line on newspapers in particular, but also published materials and ephemera. And that's been sort of a sticking point with our board as we've gone through these last couple grant cycles, and I think we've seen the demonstrated need in certain instances, and we took that to the board, and between the board and the state archivist, we came up with this text. So, projects involving widely published or non-original materials such as newspapers, published maps, and ephemera are ineligible. But then you see we bolded the word except in cases where the materials are unlikely to exist elsewhere. For example, a small community newspaper of historical significance with no other known existing copies, or if those materials uniquely document a community, organization, or business, again, looking at newsletters or concert programs or otherwise, or if those materials provide a distinct context based on the creator's organization, the news clippings and ephemera that's assembled in a scrapbook in such a way to offer additional insight into a business or community or event, those things are going to be eligible, and they're going to move along and they're going to go through to the panel for review. So the onus is going to be on you, the applicant. Again, I'm going to stress this, throughout the dialogue here, that it's very important for you to convey why your materials are important and what their significance is. And that's certainly going to be the case here as well. But just note that that is a change, and that's something that the board and the review panel has considered and taken into consideration. Again, we don't want to be looking at projects that maybe you have a run of New York Times newspapers that you want to have microfilmed or digitized or something like that. That's not the type of thing that we're talking about here. That's not going to be eligible. That's not going to be funded. Same for, again, widely available published materials. Maybe you have a run of National Geographic magazines, dating back to the earliest dates. Again, that's not the type of thing that we're looking for with these HARC grants. We're really looking for those unique, one-of-a-kind archival materials. And again, if you fall in these areas of exception where they're unlikely to exist elsewhere or otherwise document these unique businesses or organizations or communities, then that's going to be taken into consideration. Additional considerations, in your narrative, again, I mentioned and demonstrate that you'll adhere to the digital standards that we referenced. Again, that's linked in the announcement itself. And I'll try and get some links to you at the end of the presentation here as well. Applicants are encouraged to include digitized materials in the PA Power Library or DPLA. That's not a requirement, again, but you are encouraged. And really the reason behind that is one of the intended goals here is to make these things more accessible for the public and researchers. So, if one of those two don't fit your program or your needs, maybe there's another means of getting material out and available easily to the public. Again, if you can include that in your narrative, that would be helpful. Again, if you have questions, you can always call or email me. I'm not always able to get back to people right away, but please reach out and I'll do my best to get back to you as soon as I can. You can see also additional considerations. When the grant program began, of course, we actually wrote in that we would be doing site visits. Given the way the world has been the last 18 months or so, site visits are not happening. So we're looking at ways of potentially maybe having grantees do short presentations or other ways that they can sort of champion their successes. And we're not looking to police grantees. again, we're really looking for ways to celebrate the successes of the projects that have completed. So we'll take another break for questions here, and I see I did get a couple of questions sent directly to me. Let me see here. I have a question about our borough will be the recipient of, there's an acronym, I'm not quite sure what it is, upcoming. I assume that we will need to document and record these. Would this be eligible? Sharon, if you could maybe clarify for me what HX collections are. I'm not entirely sure on what you mean there. Go ahead and type that in if you'd like, and I'll move to the next question and come back to that one. William asks, does PDF-A mean accessible? No, the A in PDF-A actually stands for archival. It's an international standard for digital preservation. And that's the policy that's been approved at the state level for local government, both county and municipal, to maintain permanent records electronically. If you're interested, again, in more information about PDF-A, reach out to me after the webinar, and I'd be glad to send you some additional information on that format. But again, that is the format. It's distinct from PDF. Again, the A meaning archival, that is the international standard for digital preservation. And that's what we have issued guidance and policy for at the state level, and again, at the local government level, for maintaining permanent electronic records. I see Sharon clarified her abbreviation meant historical, so they'll be receiving historical collections, and they want to know if they can document and record those. I'd be glad to talk with you, Sharon, outside of the webinar today, and we could talk about some of the specifics, what types of materials there'll be, date spans, the volume of material, things of that nature, and be able to get a better sense of maybe where you'd be headed with an application. But, just from a high level general question, yeah, it does sound like that those might be something that would be eligible if you're bringing in historical collection of materials. Again, as I said, maybe you could look at like inventorying those materials, or purchasing supplies for those materials, ultimately, beginning to work towards the creation of a finding aid, and otherwise, appropriate storage, preservation, and down the road, maybe digitization of those. So you might be looking at, if you just have a large volume of materials coming in, you might be looking at a multi-phase project. And this might be the first step where you begin inventorying those materials, and maybe depending on the volume, you might be able to begin looking at purchasing supplies and things of that nature. So there is one big change that I want to note to everybody this year over past cycles. We are now capping grants at $5,000 for single organization applicants. And the reason for that, as I sort of alluded to earlier, is we're hoping to reach more applicants with the funds that we have available. So in years past, we had up to $15,000 available. And as you might imagine, if we have 5 or 6 applicants for the $15,000, that eats up quite a few potential grantees at the $5,000 level. So we're hoping we're able to spread the money out a little bit more to more applicants using this approach. There is no match required for any of the grants this year. And I'll note this might be a little confusing. So again, let me know in the chat if you have questions, or reach out to me specifically. But we have structured it so if you are doing a collaborative application, so if it's your organization and one other organization, you can apply for up to $10,000. If it's your organization and 2 other organizations, you can apply, again, collaboratively for up to $15,000 with no match required. If you do structure it that way, It'll be that there's one applicant. So, for the sake of conversation, your organization would be the applicant, and then you would have one or two partner applicants that you would indicate in your application. Now, the caveat here is that you will have to have a collaborative agreement with your other partners. And that collaborative agreement would just be a written statement indicating what the roles, responsibilities, and expectations are of all the involved parties. So, who's going to manage the funds, who's going to manage the money. Maybe if you're working to digitize and sort of centralize an electronic repository, if you will, who's going to be responsible for hosting those files, who's going to be doing the digitization work, and those are the types of things that you'll be looking to indicate in that collaborative agreement. These are direct grants. What I mean by that is they're paid upfront. Sometimes grants are paid on a reimbursement cycle. These are going to be paid upfront, so it is particularly important for grantees to track their expenses, make sure that you keep your receipts and otherwise. So at the end of the grant cycle, we are able to verify and rectify any issues that might arise coming out of that. A grantee is responsible for returning any unused grant funds at the end of the grant, and the contract is pretty explicit that the grantee must use the grant funds in accordance with what was approved by the commission, meaning what was in the application, or if there were changes specified by the commission. Those are going to be the eligible grant funds. So again, it's going to be important to track your expenses accurately. The application process, again, we opened May 1st and we'll be closing August 2nd because August 1st is over the weekend. So we moved it to August 2nd. And when I say August 2nd, that means the end of the day, August 2nd. So that's not August 1st at 11:59 p.m. That's August 2nd at 11:59 p.m. So you have all day on the 2nd to complete and finalize and submit your application. And as a inherent procrastinator myself, I can certainly appreciate that. Again, I mentioned that the application process is through DCED's single application system. It's best to use Google Chrome or Internet Explorer when you're working in that system. We've found that Firefox and Safari, and I'm not sure about Edge, but some of the other browsers have been problematic in that application system. So if you're having issues accessing or otherwise, again, you can contact DCED's customer service, but chances are if you change browsers, that might be a help. Again, I wanted to note there's the ability in that system to directly upload your attachments, and I'll talk about what some of those attachments are later. But I wanted to point that out to note that we do not anticipate to receive anything in paper. We are looking to receive everything electronically through that grant system, and that includes things like letters of support, which actually would be uploaded to the application itself. Again, the ESA DCED Customer Service Center is available if you have questions. One of the things I wanted to point out, as you begin working on your application, I'm sure maybe in the past that you've encountered situations where you're working on something online and they have a timeout feature, and you go back and you'd spent the last 2 hours typing something up and you took a 10-minute break and you came back and everything was gone and you wanted to throw your computer in a river. That's the case here. There is a timeout on ESA. So we've in the past suggested that as you work on your application, maybe you work on that narrative and otherwise in maybe a Word document or otherwise, and you can save your work outside of the system. And once you have your text populated, then you can go and just copy and paste and plug that right into the system and save it. And that way you don't have to worry about those dreaded timeout scenarios. There is a recorded video. You can see the link here, and I can provide that to you outside of the presentation. Our State Historic Preservation Office, I mentioned, they do a number of other grants. They have a video about navigating the ESA system. There might be some points in there that are different. You know, they're going to be applying for preservation grants as opposed to the archival grants, but largely the process is the same. So if that's something that you're interested in viewing or walking through, you can take a look at that. And I already mentioned the system takes the uploads, the attachments. Part of that, we're looking to see letters of support. And when I say letters of support, we're looking at individuals or community members or otherwise to sort of bolster your narrative and again sort of reiterate maybe why it's important or why it would be valuable to fund your organization for your project and what the value, research value might be or the preservation value down the road for researchers, individuals, or for future historians. And that can include, you know, maybe there's community members at a historical society or university that might make a good case for your project. There might be individuals who have used your collections, who've been in and actually done research and made use of the collections that might be able to make a good case for your application. And of course, you know, we always see letters of support coming in from legislators and things like that as well. So it's a minimum of 2 letters of support that are required. So again, if you get a variety of types of letters of support, that'll probably weigh in your favor as the panel looks things over. You can upload photographs in the attachments. You know, maybe you want to indicate the poor conditions of your storage area. You can submit a photograph of that, or maybe you want to include an image of a really neat ledger that's in your collection. You're welcome to do that. Again, plans and specifications, vendor quotes. If you're going to be applying for $5,000 for archival supplies, the review panel is going to be interested in seeing where those dollars are actually going. And if you can get an indication from a vendor, you know, again, having a quote saying that you're going to buy 600 boxes and 4,000 folders, or you know, whatever the case might be, being able to indicate in that quote. Similarly, with letters of commitment, if you are looking to hire a contractor, a vendor, or you know, a consultant to come in and do work specifically, having a letter of commitment saying that if these grant funds are received, that this person or professional will be completing or conducting these services for your organization. I think that's going to be helpful as well for the panel to view. And of course, your IRS nonprofit verification as well. The way the evaluation process works is that we have staff is going to confirm the eligibility of the projects as they come in. They're going to scan through the projects and say, you know, okay, this one is looking to seek funding to, you know, preserve their collection of pet rocks. That one's probably not going to move along to the review panel. But again, it's been the case in the past that the majority of applications that come in at least have an eligible component, and those things are passed along to the panel to make the determinations and make the decisions. And that panel is composed of our State Historical Records Advisory Board, or I should say members of the State Historical Records Advisory Board. And our State Historical Records Advisory Board is made up of individuals representing all walks of the archival profession. So, you know, we have folks from the all volunteer repositories. We have, you know, archival consultants who work with small repositories, all the way up to, you know, representatives from some of the larger names in the archival community. So we feel we have a good spread and a good representation, and in most cases I would say that the the board is sympathetic to the needs of the applicants. The panel then looks over the applications and ranks them by number, a score number, based on evaluation criteria, which I can get you more information about what that evaluation criteria is. We'll talk about that. Those scores are then ranked and evaluated. And the way that that worked on this last cycle was that it was broken out into 3 distinct groups. So we had the historical records repositories, which were the museums, historical societies, the libraries, and so forth. Then we had the local government, and we had the academic institutions. So those were the 3 groups that were broken out. Again, each was ranked by a panel and broken out. And a percentage of the funds was based on the percentage of applications that came in, and that's the way that those funds were dispersed for that cycle. So that worked out a little bit better than in past years, where it was just one pot, and maybe we had 3 local governments and maybe 5 academic institutions all vying for that same pot of money that the 45 historical records repositories we're looking at. So again, we were able to break it out by percentage this past year, and that seemed to work a little bit more fairly, as I see there. Looking at the evaluation criteria, this is again linked in the application announcement or the grant announcement. So there's actually a PDF there. It's taken directly from the evaluation criteria that the review panel will be looking at and scoring your application from. So if you want to know what's important and what to focus on, that's going to be a key to looking at and determining those points. You can see on the screen here, at a high level what those are. The project description is really going to be important. So when we talk about, you're going to be completing a project summary, a project narrative, budget, and a budget narrative, in addition to those uploads and things like that. So in your narrative, that project description, that is going to be the key to your application. And really the core aspect of that is describing what the records are, what the dates of those records are, what the volume of the records are, so what they are, what the dates are, how much of it there is, and then ultimately describing the significance of those records. Why are those records important, and why would they be good for the PHMC to provide funding to help you preserve and make those records available? You can have an application that's top-notch 100%, but if you don't have a description of what your records are, and you don't have an indication of those points, why they're important, how much of the materials, what the dates are, that's going to be a huge ding against you, as you can see with this being worth 30 points. So I'm again would stress the importance of that as you begin looking at constructing your narrative and your application. The work plan, the timetable, again, I think that's fairly self-explanatory. Just make sure that you allow a reasonable amount of time for the proposed work. These grant cycles run 2 full years, so don't cut yourself short there. You have plenty of time. Be sure to use that time. You're going to be in a better situation if you come to us and say, hey, we finished early, than to say, we're not going to be able to finish this in the time that we proposed. Again, you have plenty of time, so make sure you use that. Personnel and consultants. I will note this is something that the review panel likes to harp on. They look at this closely. So specifically, if you're going to be hiring somebody, if you're looking at hiring a contractor or a consultant or farming work out to a vendor, the panel's going to want to see that these are reputable or otherwise trustworthy and individuals or companies that are going to be tending to the records appropriately. So being able to demonstrate that will be helpful in your application with qualifications. You know, again, talking about expected responsibilities, job descriptions, and again, if you're looking at hiring a consultant or a contractor, being able to include some sort of letter of commitment to the work that they will be completing, or you know, maybe it's the case that you're going to be looking at hiring interns, and you don't know what their qualifications and things of that nature are. Again, you can certainly be forthcoming about that and indicate what your expectations of the person that you're going to be seeking are. So not in all cases are you going to know what their qualifications are. Make sure you're able in those cases to spell out what it is that your expectations are. One of the big things that's overlooked, and I want to stress this, I want to make sure everybody hears me when I say this, the project promotion is critical. And it's not huge. This isn't something that you need to write 2 pages about. You don't even need to write 2 paragraphs about. Just make sure that you include mention of project promotion, specifically in your project narrative, as well as in your work plan and timetable. You're going to want to show maybe that when you receive notification that you've gotten the grant award, maybe you're going to put something out in your newsletter, or you're going to post it on your Facebook page. Again, doesn't have to be huge, doesn't have to be complicated, doesn't have to be several sentences. Just an indication that you're going to do something. You know, the things that people like to see on the panel, again, are going to be an announcement that you received the award, and maybe something at the end of the project, or, you know, it would be going above and beyond to say, you know, midway through the project, having a check-in, but certainly at the beginning and the end of the project, at the end, if you're able to say, you know, these are the things that we did, this is what we were able to accomplish, and we used these historical and archival records care grant funds to do that. Those are the types of things that they're looking to see. And again, you know, maybe 2 sentences, 3 sentences, just make sure it's included in that narrative, as well as in the work plan and timetable as well. Being able to show what your benefit's going to be to the public and to the researchers. Again, that's why we're including the letters of support. You know, it's important to convey what that research value is. The budget, looking for something straightforward, but we also want it to be detailed. You know, we've seen applications in the past where it was indicated that somebody wanted to buy archival supplies, and they're requesting $4,000 for archival supplies. Well, what are those archival supplies, and how many archival supplies? You know, how many boxes, how many folders, how many reams of tissue paper, or whatever the case might be there. And again, as I noted, if you can indicate or include a quote from a vendor, that's going to be helpful as well when you're looking at purchasing or otherwise, even if contracting with a vendor to digitize as well, including some sort of quote there. And of course, accuracy, completeness, and merit. I think that's pretty self-explanatory. The timeline that we're looking at, again, the applications are due August 2nd. So that is a couple months down the pike here. The award notification will go out presumably in December of 2021, which is when the commission meeting will be held. And you might think that's a long time between there, but until we get all the applications in, we have staff review them and begin scheduling with the State Historical Records Advisory Board to begin looking at and reviewing, you know, and as we noted earlier, sometimes we have 61 applications this past cycle. So it does take a good bit of time to get those. Again, they're volunteer members of the panel to look at those materials. We need to give them some time to do that, to come up with fair assessments. Ultimately, the projects cannot start until a grantee receives the executed contract. We're estimating here that will begin in May of 2022. So again, we're looking at a bit of a time lapse here between August and May. There is a lot of work actually transpiring in between those 2 dates. It seems like a long time, but there's several workflow steps that things have to go through from fiscal and legal and otherwise before that final executed contract is issued. And then you can see the grant period would be anticipated to be May to May through 22 through 2024. And we'll pause here for questions again. I am looking at my chat questions. I see somebody had asked, confirming the presentation slides will be available for downloading. I know you're recording one. Will it be available? Yes to both of those. This is being recorded. We will get this to our media folks probably today. I would anticipate within the next week to 2 weeks, the recording will be on PHMC's YouTube page. Again, I can provide you that link information. I'll send out an email after the webinar here this morning with all these links and otherwise attachments that I've mentioned, so you all have them. Also, the slides, yes, I can make those available if that would be helpful as well. And I have another, somebody mentioned that there are 2 numbers listed for DCED. Which one to use? So I am guessing that one of those is the general DCED number, which would probably then direct you to the call center. Let me look back here quick and see. I should be able to get that for you. Just their customer support center is the first number listed there. So that's the 379 7448 number. That's the number that I have for their customer support call center. And I don't see that we have any other questions coming in. I see we are pushing 11 o'clock here. I'm in no hurry to go. I know, again, your time's valuable, but if you are interested in hanging around, finishing out the slides, we have about 5 or 6 more slides to go here. And again, I'm glad to hang on to answer questions thereafter as well. So just some tips, generally speaking, for competitive applications. The best applications are going to be those that are concise but completely explain what you're hoping to accomplish. And I know sometimes that might be a little bit more easily said than done. But again, those points that I stressed, describing the materials, what are the records, what format are they in, how much of the materials are there, what are the date ranges, why are they significant, and are there things that make those records at risk? Those are going to be the kinds of things that right off the bat, you're either going to hook the panel with or they're going to keep on swimming. So again, those are the key important things that you want to describe. And as I mentioned, make sure that you include some information about your planned promotion. Again, doesn't have to be huge. Just mention on Facebook and your newsletter, whatever that is, just make sure it's in there in the narrative as well as in the timetable and work plan. Because if it's not there, you're going to get dinged 10 points right off the bat. And I've talked to a number of applicants from past cycles who otherwise had excellent applications, but because they got dinged that 10 points, that made the difference between funding and not funding. You know, they were right around that cutoff line, and that 10 points really hurt them. Again, talking about research value, we've mentioned that, conveying the benefit of the project, and also talking about why records are at risk. So, you know, what are the storage conditions, or, you know, are those records being handled frequently and it's causing damage to those materials? Those are additional things that you're going to want to convey as well. Again, we're looking for things that are well planned. You know, in cases of preservation or even with digitization projects, you're going to want to be looking at making sure that you spell out you're looking to remove things from poor housing. Then, you know, maybe, again, this is just a hypothetical, maybe you're going to digitize this material and replace the originals into archival housing and put them into a proper environment. And, you know, maybe a project like that might sound ambitious for the $5,000 that we're offering, and maybe that is. So that's another point to consider. You know, maybe your particular situation doesn't warrant biting off, you know, an entire A to Z project, and instead for that $5,000 you can focus on, again, maybe purchasing supplies. And then maybe digitization is phase 2 down the road, or vice versa. But again, being able to convey that sentiment in your narrative would be helpful to give a sense to the panelist of what your situation is and what your intentions and hopes are down the road. One of the other things I want to mention is the benefit of purchasing, particularly when we talk about digitization, purchasing equipment versus using a vendor. There are cases where each is going to be beneficial. So you might have a case, where in-house you're looking to purchase digitization equipment to do some scanning of materials. Maybe you have, let's say you have 5 boxes of photographs and, maybe 5 boxes of documents that you want to scan. Um, conceivably, that's something that you could do in-house with volunteers over the course of a 2-year project. And then at the end of the project, you have that equipment. You have the laptop, you have the scanner that you purchased, and your volunteers are able to continue working maybe on another project to digitize other materials. So that's a benefit that way. On the other hand, if you have a great volume of materials, that there's a pressing need to get those materials digitized, and say you have 40 or 50 boxes, maybe it's the case that you would be better served looking to a vendor to farm those materials out and have that vendor do that digitization work for you, just because of the sheer volume of material. Again, sort of the dry legal stuff on the back end. The expectations for the grantee, of course, you'll execute the grant agreement with the Commonwealth. There are interim reports that'll be due and expected every 6 months. There will be a final report due at the end of the grant cycle. And the thing I want to stress here the most is that it's imperative that your organization stays current on grant administration. And what I mean by that is, we've seen, and certainly understandable, especially in, given the climate over the last 18 months or so, but staff changes. Maybe it's the case that the person that was indicated as the contact on the grant application is no longer with your organization. Well, we no longer have a way to contact anybody in your organization when we're not receiving those interim reports because that staff person's gone. Or otherwise, if there's issues with funding, we've seen that as well, where maybe there were questions about the financial back end with the transfer of funds, and we reach out to an organization, that contact information is no longer valid, and it ultimately just causes delays for the grantee with funding and complications that way. So make sure, if somebody leaves or there's turnover or responsibilities change or email addresses change, the best thing to do is to enter that information into the ESA system when it happens, and make us aware of that as well, so that we can all stay current with the administration components of the grant. As I mentioned, just some things here. There's the PHMC website, and you can get to the grant announcement that way. As I said, I'll send out an email with all these links and attachments when we're done here today. Our PHMC YouTube page, there's a number of resources that might be helpful there, but that's where this video ultimately will be posted. There's currently a video posted from 2 years ago. The information is mostly the same. As I noted, there have been some changes, but that's something that you can view there. My contact information, again, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. As I said, I can't always get back to you right away, but I will do my best to get back to you as soon as I can. And DCED's information is here as well, and I believe that's the correct phone number there and correct contact information. The last thing I wanted to point out before I let you go is we, starting in 2009, we had a program called Archives Without Tears. It was a 2-day workshop where we went out to small repositories across the state and were able to give 2-day A to Z archival training for, again, it was targeted at those small repositories and maybe, the organizations where it's all volunteers and nobody's had, formal archival training before. So it's sort of again, you see the keyword there, practical training and approaches to a lot of the situations that we see grantees and applicants facing with their archival materials and their collections. Of course, with the COVID, we haven't been able to do the workshop We weren't able to go out last year. We've made the determination not to do in person this year. So what we did do was we sort of distilled down those key concepts from that 2-day workshop, and we have 9 modules. I think the longest module is like 18 minutes. So it's considerably shorter than 2 days, but we've distilled down, again, those key concepts into 9 online modules. Those, again, are available on the PHMC YouTube page, and I'll include that link in the email that I send out hereafter. But again, it's sort of the A to Z. It gives you an introduction to archives, talks about collections policy, talks about appraisal and accessioning, processing, preservation, finding aids, environment, housing, and access and reference, and sort of a very high level overview of digitization as well. So that might be a helpful resource to you as well as you begin looking at and thinking about your projects. And I will be glad to take any other questions at this time. And I just wanted to say thank you, and please don't be discouraged by the task of looking at and navigating and creating a narrative to apply for the grant. And again, our objective and our goal here is to help those repositories that have these important records. And it's been really interesting and neat to see all the various types of records and the collections that applicants have submitted to preserve. It's really wonderful, and certainly something that I enjoy seeing as we go through these applications. But again, the point being, it really is our goal to help you preserve those records. So I'm looking to see if I have any other questions. And I don't see anything coming in, but like I said, I'll hang out here for a little bit. If anybody does have any questions, and maybe even if anybody wants to jump in, unmute and ask a question out loud, I'd be glad to do that as well. Okay, I've clicked on to allow participants to unmute. So I see Sharon, you had a question that you wanted to ask.
Yeah.
Please feel free to go ahead.
Okay. Josh, I'm not exactly 100% sure about what our municipality's acquisition is going to be, but we have an elderly gentleman in our borough who is really an excellent historian, and he wants to donate his collections to the borough. Now, I don't know exactly what those collections are. I know that there would be a lot of objects, not necessarily just paper or paper records or maps or whatever. So that's what I was kind of wondering about. Is this sounds as if it's more geared towards archives, paperwork, maps, and so forth, as you've mentioned. So I wasn't sure with what I think might be coming in, if that would be eligible.
So I would say probably what you would be looking at there is, you have these materials coming in. Do you have a sense of when they might be?
Well, he's ready to give them. We just have not been able to receive them at all. And he's dancing and dancing around. He said, I'm not going to be here forever.
Right.
Yeah, so whatever. He's still pretty hardy, I'll tell you.
Yeah. Oh, good.
He's actually our local Uncle Sam. He literally looks like Uncle Sam.
Is that right?
Does every single parade, with the whole full regalia, So, but bless his heart, he's wonderful. So I don't know. I mean, we could have them as soon as we wanted them.
Well, that's great. And, those tend to be gold mines for, all kinds of different information, family information, business information. I would imagine you're probably going to have a lot of ephemera coming in with that, maybe scrapbooks, photographs, things of that nature. I think without having a sense of what actually is going to be coming in and what actually you have, without inventorying or putting hands on and seeing what you have, probably the best that you would do at this point for a grant would maybe be to either have a consultant or to begin inventorying the materials. And sometimes, something like an inventory, if, maybe what you're getting, maybe you're only getting, and when I say only, that's not to
Right. I
sound
understand.
negative, but, maybe you're getting 20 boxes of materials. Maybe that's the type of thing that a group of volunteers could go through an inventory over a couple months. And then maybe not, this grant cycle, but maybe next grant cycle, you could say, okay, we have these 20 boxes, and there's this really great photograph collection, or there's this really great oral history collection. And those specific things would be the types of things that you would want to apply for the grant, again, to purchase the supplies or reformatting and things of that nature.
Right. As opposed to lamps, historical lamps that were made in the town and that sort
Right.
of thing, which I'm sure will come in as well.
Right. Yeah, those 3D objects are not going to be something that would be funded.
Right.
You mentioned the lamps. I know a lot of times there's things like plaques and otherwise. They're great, and they have their place, but unfortunately, like I said, we have to draw a line somewhere with what we can and can't fund.
Well, that's okay. And I'm going to redo the recording and all, and I'll spend more time thinking about it. But then initially I was thinking also that we would need somebody to inventory, like, maybe that would be a salary of someone we would bring into inventory and make a record. And I was thinking along those lines also. Is that
Absolutely. Yep.
something? Yeah. You want to have a record of your acquisitions and what they are,
Right.
So,
Absolutely. And,
okay.
I would encourage you to check out those Archives Without Tears videos. We talk about the accessioning process and the appraisal process with, that's documenting those materials as they come in,
Right.
and
Exactly.
determining which of those materials are going to be important. And, sometimes it's the case that you get materials in that, like you said, you have this wonderful donor, but maybe there's some things in there that really don't fit your mission or what you're trying to accomplish. And it might be the case that you need to delicately or gently discuss with them and say, these aren't something that fit our mission. And hopefully they're okay with that, and you're still able to get those good things that you're looking for.
Well, I think we're going to have a lot of stuff, but okay,
Sure.
that's fine. That's helpful. I know there's other people probably waiting, but I know that as an intern, my daughter did a whole archive project in one of these historical homes in Vermont that was turning itself over to the county, and so she went in and she as a college student, she archived. That was a project she did, all just everything. So that's another thing. I kind of was thinking along those lines too. So okay, well,
And Sharon, did you say you're with a borough office? Is that what you said?
yes, I am. Well,
Okay.
I'm on the council. Yes.
Okay. So do you have like a borough historical society, or is it just the borough
We do
offices?
have an historical commission. Yes.
Okay.
And we're
So,
getting ready for our 150th anniversary coming up in 2022.
oh, okay, great. Well, that's good timing. That's good
Great.
timing.
Yeah. Hopefully that'll help us. Yeah.
Yeah. So if you're looking at doing an application, that might be something you want to make clear in there as well, that
For women.
yeah, and that it's not just the borough office,
Right.
that
Okay.
you do have a historic commission, through the borough that would be working on this project or
Uh-huh.
otherwise.
Right. Okay. All right. I won't take up too much. I mean, I could talk with you for another hour, but I don't want to take up any more of your time.
Well, that's fine. And like I said, don't hesitate to reach out to me,
Okay.
and I'll do my best to get back to you.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Mhm.
All right.
Hi, I have a question.
Sure.
Uh, I'm with the church. I'm a church historian, and I'm just wondering how soon can we have someone look at a draft of our application?
So unfortunately, we're not able to look at drafts. That's a decision that we made just because of the volume of applicants that we see. But I'm glad to, if you have some ideas in mind, or even if you've begun working on a project narrative and things, if you want to call and chat with me, I'd be glad. I'd be more than glad to spend an hour or so just chatting with you on the phone about your ideas and the project.
Okay, thank you.
Yep, absolutely. And if that's something you're interested in, please reach out to me, shoot me an email, and we'll see if we can set up a time in the next 2 or 3 weeks and get something on the books.
Very good. Thank you.
You're quite welcome. Does anybody else have any questions? You're welcome to unmute and ask. It's what I'm here for.
Josh,
Yes.
I have to tell you something funny.
Sure.
A couple years ago, when I think the cycle that would be ending now, I had heard about this grant, and I inquired about it, but we weren't ready. It was still with the same gentleman, and he
Okay.
was just starting to, and you called me back
Mhm.
and left a message on my answering machine. I still have that message on my answering.
Yeah.
I don't have to be the historical person, right?
Yeah. Is that a to-do list kind of thing? Yeah.
Right. It was like, well, maybe the next cycle
Yeah.
sort of a thing. And then this opportunity came up for the webinar. It's so funny. So
Yeah.
and I have one of those machines that you have to refresh it every once in a while. So it'll say you have so many savings. You have to do them before you listen to your. So I hear you like every 3 months or something. I have to press the button.
I'm just burrowing in there, right?
Yeah. Thank you, Josh.
Yeah. No, absolutely. That's funny.
Also, I loved you did the one on the. I'm a nurse and I'm a teacher for students, and you did the 1918 Spanish flu.
Oh, the presentation.
Yeah, right. And something happened towards the end of it that I couldn't do the whole thing. But of course, we used that and compared that to COVID. I always
Oh,
have
yeah.
for my students.
Yeah.
Yeah. But thank you so much.
Yeah. Actually, my colleague Ty did a lot of work on that, and that was really well received. And obviously for the reasons you said with the comparisons to modern times, it's kind of striking.
Yeah. Huh. Well. Thank you for today. And I am at work, so I should probably spend a little bit of time at work now. So
Sure.
thank you so much.
You're quite welcome. Have a great afternoon.
You too.
Does anybody else have any questions? All right. Well, I'll go ahead and just say thank you to everybody for attending. If you change your mind and you want to speak up, go ahead and unmute. But otherwise, again, thank you. Don't hesitate to reach out to me, and I will grab everybody's email address as soon as I get off here. And I actually had a list of links and things that I want to make sure that I get to you, so I will send those out. And I'll direct you to the PHMC YouTube page where this will eventually be posted as well. Unfortunately, I can't say that it'll be up in 5 days or 7 days. I just don't know. But it'll be up within the next 2 weeks, I imagine. So again, if you do have questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to me directly. And I look forward to seeing some project submissions from everybody. So thank you and have a great afternoon.